Hi, everyone, and a big thank you for joining us today for a discussion on recognizing and preventing burnout in your engineering teams. This is a LeadDev webinar created in partnership with Jellyfish. Our webinar will be roughly 45 minutes long, and after that time, both myself as well as our panelists will be in the LeadDev Slack channel to answer some of your questions. And you can find us in the creating-culture channel. So put all your questions there and we'll answer them later. We may also have some time to answer a couple of questions live. Please do submit any live questions through the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we'll get to them towards the end of our talk. Any questions that land in the Q&A chat in Zoom that we don't get to immediately, we will move over into the Slack channel and answer at the end. So let's get started now that we've covered the logistics. I'm Lena Reinhardt, and today I'm joined by fabulous panelists who are here to talk about their experiences and share their lessons learned with you. And for the introductions, let's start with Tremaine.
Hey, thanks, Lena. Hey, everyone. My name is Tremaine Darby. I am a senior engineering manager at Red Hat. I manage a global DevOps team, and I've been in management for approximately a little over 5 years. And I'm just very happy to be here. And I will hand it over to Shelley.
Everyone, I'm Shelley Stewart. I've been an engineering manager for around 6 years now. I spent the past 2 at Circle CI. I also have a bit of a psychology background, so the topic of burnout is near and dear to my heart. I'm really excited that we're chatting about such an important topic today. I'll hand it over to Luke.
Hey, I'm Luke. I'm a director of engineering at Jellyfish. I've been in kind of leadership related stuff for, I think, 7 or 8 years and software since the late 90s, doing Y2K bugs and exciting things like that. I'm happy to be here. Derek.
Hello, everyone. It's Derek Chan from Seattle. So I'm the director of software engineering in Alaska Airlines. So I start off my engineering journey as an engineer like 20-something years ago, and then have been engineering management for the last 8 years. So I mainly work in Alaska Airlines to support any computer software application for operations. Good to be here.
Thanks, you all. And I can tell all of you who are listening today that I got to speak with these folks about these topics already in our prep call, and I'm super excited for all of you that you're getting to hear their perspectives. So I'm your facilitator for today. I'm Lena Reinhardt. I work as a leadership coach and consultant for organizations and executives. And prior to that was VP engineering with Circle CI, Travis CI, and a software as a service startup and CEO co-founder. And I've also dealt with burnout myself and have also dealt with burnout on many of the teams that I've worked with, unfortunately. And as we're diving into this topic, it's a big term, and of course, it's a big, important topic, and also one that can be quite tricky to navigate. And today you'll hear from all these experts we have here on how to do that and hopefully take some things away for yourself. And I want to start a little bit with just the foundations to make sure we're all talking about the same thing. So what is burnout? How do we define it?
Yeah, so burnout, I think a lot of us think about burnout in terms of overwork, right? That person who's working the really long hours, but there's actually a lot more to it than that. The clinical definition has 3 different categories. So one is exhaustion or energy depletion. The second is cynicism or an increased mental distance from one's job. And then the third is feeling ineffective or a lack of accomplishment. And all of this comes down to being caused by unmanaged and chronic workplace stress. And I like to think of it as consistently exceeding your mental or emotional capacity for work. And that capacity looks different for everyone. It can be influenced by factors outside of work. So it's not always just that person who's working 60-hour work weeks, right? And it really can look different for everybody too. It's a spectrum. So while there are those 3 categories, it's going to look different in everybody. Some of those things might come out more than others. And it also starts small. Like you might see little things at first that tie into one of those components, and then it will build over time if not addressed.
I love that. Thank you. I think especially the call out that it starts small and it also looks different in everyone is really important. So of course, we're talking about this also in the context of engineering leadership. So what do you all think about our role as leaders when it comes to recognizing, preventing burnout? How do you view this from your experience?
Yeah, I personally have a lot of experience of myself being burned out, right? And I think there's a, like, just like Shelly said, right? I mean, everything starts small, and actually everything, in my opinion, kind of start with ourselves as a leader, right? We, if just like I'm kind of like a self-help junkie myself. I read a lot of self-help books that we all kind of recognize, knowing that in order to help others, right, recognize your team burns out, you first need to understand yourself. Are you yourself being burned out? Because if yourself are burned out, how can you be more sensitive to your team and understand they are burning out, right? So I think notice yourself, uh, opportunity to see where we at, and then making sure that we work with our own managers, right, our own boss, right, to understanding how can we prevent the burnout, how can we sometimes step back and then take a break ourselves, right, and even sometimes rely on our team. That is very important too. So like I have a managers who currently in paternity leave. I mean, I actually lean on my own managers, other managers, to help me with some of the administrative work that's to share across for their managers, right? So I would say, right, really start with ourselves is such an important thing.
And that introspection is so crucial to Tremaine. Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to add, just on the topic of recognizing it, it's very important to know what someone's baseline is, right? So you want to be able to have those regular one-on-ones, those frequent interactions, to understand how does a person operate normally. And then when you're looking at what deviates from that, so has absenteeism increased? Is their velocity down? They normally operate at one. Are things coming in a lot more sloppy, more bugs? And then there's, how do they interact with others? Are they being snarky? A lot more cynicism, negative talk, things of that nature. So, it's important to know what that baseline is, and then see how those things deviate. And then, just look for those particular types of behaviors.
It's a great call out. Like these relationships that we all need to have anyway are really crucial and a foundation for this aspect as well. Thank you, Tremaine. Anything else on sort of our role as leaders in recognizing burnout? Yeah, Shelley?
Yeah, I'll add that, in our role as leaders, one thing we need to keep in mind, we're not clinicians, right? We can't diagnose burnout in someone. We can recognize signs, we can express concerns, but we can't diagnose. And related to that, we also can't cure burnout for somebody, right? We can provide an environment in which we can minimize work stress for someone. We can try to address specific things that are contributing to someone's work stress. We can have someone step away. A lot of people think that vacation can be a cure for burnout, but it's not, because if the person can't reframe how they approach their work, then they're going to come back and it's just going to be a cycle, right? Like it's all going to happen again. So we have some tools that can help someone manage burnout, but ultimately it has to be on the individual to seek out the help that they need to be able to get themselves through their burnout.
Yeah, and there's a big role. Go on, Luke.
Oh, just to add to the original definition, right? There's the quantitative that's like there's just too much work and you're working too hard, and eventually you're going to pay for that. But then I've experienced burnout in a 35-hour-a-week job where the hours weren't long and the work wasn't hard. It was just conflicty, right? Or it felt ineffective, or I was disconnected from the work, or the work would, whatever it was, I wasn't getting out of the work. And then you burn out of it. You stop caring. You stop feeling engaged and connected to that work. And it's not always related to the quantity. So I think for each individual to understand, and a vacation won't fix that for sure. I mean, if you need a rest, you should rest, to be clear. But again, it's not going to fix a dysfunctional work environment or any of those sort of things. So I think for each individual to sort of, when they say the burnout word, is like, okay, let's dig into that. And what is the thing that you think, is kind of at the cause of that? Because it's going to be different for different folks.
Yeah. And I love the call out that's sort of coming across from all of you around like understanding individuals' needs and respecting their needs and working with them to support them to the degree that we can within the scope of the work environment. And enabling that wherever that's possible. And one point I also want to add, because I loved what you just mentioned, Luke, around so that burnout can also come up in different ways, is that Like one specific issue in our industry is also that members of underrepresented groups often struggle with burnout because they're often asked to do what's called second shift work. So for example, be involved in diversity initiatives, be involved in inclusion work. And that work is often not necessarily recognized. It doesn't come with pay increases, doesn't come with promotions, and that can really lead people into burnout as well. And it's a huge factor in inclusion because we're often like taking members of marginalized groups and bringing them into potentially toxic environments and then asking them to do work that's outside of the scope of their role. And especially over the last couple of years, as more companies have been trying to engage on these topics more, which is great, making sure that that work is recognized and that people are actually paid for it and that there are experts who do it and not just engineers who do this as second shift work because they feel like they're being pressured into it is also a really important aspect of this. So I love the description. I think Tremaine added it earlier around some symptoms of what burnout can look like. You mentioned things like velocity is down or absenteeism increases, and the necessity to understand both their sort of baseline and their normal, as well as then to see the deviations from that. What experience do you all have in sort of recognizing burnout in addition to that? And also, how do you bring that up even when you notice it or you think you notice it?
Well, I will say that as soon as you notice it, bring it up, right? That's the type of conversation that doesn't really age well because it's going to get worse over time. And so, just come in with curiosity, I've noticed this, be factual, and bring those things up. There's usually a couple of things like just make sure that the workload is at the right level and those sorts of things. And if you can eliminate those kind of obvious things, then chances are you're dealing with either, something like burnout or some other mental health issue. So definitely go in there early and try to understand what they're telling you.
So I'm just going to ask a silly question, but what do you say? You've seen some signs, what do you say, Shelley?
Yeah, I think Tremaine talked a little bit about the importance of being very factual and really talking about what you can physically see, right? You don't want to make any assumptions. But when I'm coming into a one-on-one conversation, I jump in with curiosity, right? I start with open-ended questions. I saw that you've been working a lot of extra hours lately. This really seems unlike you. Can you tell me more about what's been driving you to do that lately? And then, from there, listening and responding and trying to come to a place together as to how we can potentially take a step in the right direction.
No assumptions, just curiosity.
Yeah, because it's easy to jump in and be like, oh, I think this person's going to that diagnosis, right? Like, I think that person's burnt out. I think they're working too many hours. I think we just need to assign to somebody else. But really understanding the reasoning behind what's driving them so that we can get to the underlying cause. Maybe that person is feeling a lot of stress about an upcoming deadline, but maybe the deadline's not really that stressful at all. Maybe it's just like a soft deadline within the team. You can have those discussions to help kind of reduce that stress that person is feeling once you understand what's driving it.
Thank you.
Yeah. Lena, just real quick, just recognize that it may not be work. That's the problem. We are whole people. And we bring our personal lives into work as well. And so there may be things that in that conversation, someone just doesn't want to disclose. And so you got to recognize that's issue that you have to deal with as well. And you may just need to back them off of some things without even knowing what the real underlying issue is.
That's a great call out. Thank you. And I also want to build on that and say, people know their needs. Like if someone tells you, for example, hey, I have a lot of stress in my personal life. Yes, I'm working more right now than I usually do, but right now work is giving me structure that I'm lacking in other places. I need this at the moment to have something that's giving me stability or a sense of fulfillment. Respect that. Work with them to figure out how to make sure that work doesn't then become an added source of stress. To make sure you're staying in touch on that and continuing the conversation. But people are adults and respect their needs. And I think that's a really important part of this too.
Yeah, and
Derek?
I think also sometime, right, like when when we think of somebody is burnout or has stress, I mean, it's not necessarily they may not actually stressing the things that is necessary to be stressed, right? For example, like Shelly mentioned about, we always have project deadlines and stuff, or sprint goals or whatever, and then or somebody may feel like, oh, I have performance stress. I don't think I'm doing a good job. I mean, I think as a leader, sometimes we really need to is talking with them, explaining the why of everything, right? Like why we are doing these things, right? Why we are having this deadline, or even understanding, like asking them why you're stressed, and then find out, actually you don't have to stress about this because of why, right? I mean, I think that a lot of the time we do need to actually understand the problem and then explaining the situation, because engineer may not have the big picture of the goals or of the projects. So then sometimes we just have to reiterate that so that they know that, hey, actually, that this is not something you need to stress about, right?
I love that. Thank you. And I just realized through comment that we haven't fully covered like what burnout can actually look like and the symptoms. And so I want to make sure that we get a little bit back to that. Tremaine had shared a couple points earlier around like work behaviors changing, including like snarkiness towards coworkers, for example, or absenteeism, velocity being down. Like, what are other symptoms that you all have seen in people actually?
I do have a little story, right? I mean, so when maybe can use a story to spot our first symptoms. So so I support operations, and there was like a operation incident happens, and then I starting seeing the team, right? The engineer who they are all great engineer, but they start having some kind of like an unsettled opinions, right? Like things like, oh, why are we doing this thing? Oh, why we are not doing that thing? So, or sometimes even like start going back to, hey, this piece of code was not written right 2 years ago. I mean, you can start to see things that their opinion is like something. It's not like a wrong opinion, but it's a opinion. Sometimes it's not very actionable right away. It's become more like as like opinion which is unsettled, right? And I see that a lot of time when I spot those things happening, is to me it's like a really good symptoms about, hey, there is some stress or burnout happening because of maybe the project progress, or because what we are asking them, or because what they feel about the situation.
Thank you. Anything any of you want to add on the symptoms?
Yeah, I think there's
Awesome.
another one. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
It's okay. I was going to add on a little to the part that Derek just mentioned, because it really touches on that cynicism, right? That like the person who suddenly like everything is kind of bothering them, the person who can't, disagree and commit when the team has like had a great discussion about something and wants to move forward, the person who just can't really let it go. Like, I think that's a sign that I see a lot in folks. Also, in terms of performance, I feel like there are kind of two buckets of people that I've seen. There's the person who's very disconnected from their work. They're not participating in meetings. They're less responsive. They're not really available to the team. But then there's the opposite of that. There's the person who is like self-inflicting overwork. They're the person who's like on Slack, jumping on every question within 60 seconds of somebody posting it. The person who's going in so many different directions and working in that constant reactive mode that it's hard for them to feel like they're actually accomplishing anything. It's just this constant multitask, and it's hard for them to kind of break free of that and get back to work that they can feel like is more productive. And Tremaine, do you want to add on?
Yeah, I do. And as you were talking, I realized that I can expand my comment a little bit, because basically one of the other things that you can have your ear to the ground is how this person is affecting other people's work. Are they waiting for something for a long time? Is this, I can't get a hold of them, again, not responsive or anything like that, as opposed to maybe the person who's like bulldozing, right? Like jumping in and trying to be Superman or Superwoman in order to, feel like they're catching up. So, I've seen the former more than I have the latter, but I believe both exist.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. I love the different nuances that you brought to the symptoms, and how, very different it can look like in different people, like from the shutdown to sort of overwork and going really all in on everything. So we've covered a lot around like recognizing burnout, making sure you understand others on your team, how they work, what they need. And I want to shift a little bit now to the topic of preventing burnout. Which of course, like right now, there's a lot of pressure in many organizations on delivery. Many companies are currently like still setting goals for the next quarter, or you've just started a new one. The whole topic of efficiency is on everyone's minds. Many companies have had layoffs and are trying to hit the same goals with fewer people around. So I want to talk a bit about two parts to this. The first part, like in our role as leaders, is managing up. Like there's a lot that we work on when it comes to setting goals for our teams, creating alignment upwards, but also creating visibility to our bosses on how teams are doing. The second part that we'll dig into a bit more is then helping teams, but also supporting individuals. And both of those are really relevant to like any leader's work, of course. And so let's start a little bit with the managing up. I think Shelley earlier mentioned as well that like we can create an environment for people, and managing up is an important part of that. So like, how do you view like managing up when it comes to preventing burnout? Like what are things that leaders can actually do?
Yeah, I think when we talk a lot about efficiency this year, and some people think of that immediately as sort of getting more juice from the orange, like just like squeezing it harder and not wasting and reducing waste. And I think I would prefer to frame that as that if we're worried about efficiency, it means we need to do the most important things first, right? And to be real with ourselves about what's possible in a sustainable environment, and what, like, if we don't agree with leaders within our organization that this is the most important thing we could do, if we did nothing else, this thing is worth doing and it is worth our effort. Then that alignment is critical. And coming back to the engagement we want to feel as engineers, as leaders in our work, to say, I want to feel like that my energy is going into something worthwhile. I want to feel like it's making a difference, and that my effort is not just in kind of holding myself together or holding a team together, but we're actually achieving something, we're delivering, we're getting a goal. So having that alignment across, like, do we all agree what's most important here? And that we might have to say no to something else. And if something new comes in, we may have to ask, which things should we stop doing to accommodate that? And so that can only happen in those sort of vertical discussions among those sort of things. And then the other part of that, I think, is in the metric space, and the sort of measuring. And so obviously the caveat that Jellyfish is in the metric space, which you get, is where is our energy actually going? If we say that a thing is the most important thing, this is the project that our team is going to deliver, and we're excited to deliver it. And frankly, we're hungry for like the dopamine we get from shipping the thing. Oh, and like only 20% of our energy is actually going into that. No wonder we're frustrated, right? No wonder we feel like we're working hard, but we're not getting there. Or half of our time got sniped into some other emergency work or some customer request or something that feels less important. Well, now what do we do? Now we've put stress on our due date, and now we put stress on our deliverable. And now I'm going to have to work this weekend to get the thing done on time, or I'm letting the team down. And those sort of stresses that build in come from, in my mind, like one of the things that can come from is just that misalignment. Like, this thing is important enough that we're going to say no to some other things, and then we're going to measure it and just keep track of ourselves and understand, is most of our energy going into the most important thing, and how can we track that together?
I love the sort of purpose that you called out, but also the saying no, which honestly, in my experience, is one of the hardest parts for any organization. Shelley, I think you wanted to say something.
Yeah, very much related to that. One of the things I really like to focus on with my teams is predictability in terms of what we're delivering. I personally like using sprints and story points to help measure this. That isn't everyone's jam, and that's fine. But when we're thinking about efficiency, the last thing we want to do is under deliver. And what I love about having a sense of the team's velocity is it allows us to have realistic timelines and to really have intelligent discussions about the work that we're prioritizing and why. So, if we come with a project and we're like, we're going to have it done by X date, and the business is like, nope, that's not going to work, then we're having a conversation about what do we deprioritize? Can we reduce scope? Having those conversations instead of let's push our teams harder to meet this deadline that we've set for ourselves, it just allows for a conversation where stressing our team out doesn't really enter the picture. And then I think related to that, also measuring the percentage of our work that's being spent on escalations and toil work, especially with layoffs that folks have been dealing with. Teams are getting smaller, but that work does not get smaller, right? Like we still have to keep the lights on. We still have to do the maintenance. And so that can become a much larger and potentially unhealthy percentage of your team's work, especially like it might have been healthy before, but maybe it's not now. And being able to measure that and see how much of your velocity that your team is spending on those things allows us to have the conversation to prioritize the technical investments that we need that can reduce that toil and get the team feeling productive again.
The other, I guess, dimension of that is making sure that when you're having those prioritization conversations, to ensure the team knows why those decisions were made, and so that they can have some agency in even, pointing out, maybe we should do this differently, or, I see this thing over here that would fit a little bit better to our goals, right? And so you give people a little bit more in terms of just being able to contribute to that prioritization discussion, and that I think would reduce some of that that burnout and that feeling of just kind of drifting with, what happens when the priorities change.
I love that. Thank you. So managing up, a big part is making sure you're aligned, also making sure you have the visibility you need to plan yourself, but then also to report upwards. Are we actually spending time on the most important priorities? What are those? What are the things that we're not doing anymore? Because we're not taking on 5 top areas. That never works, but most organizations do it in some shape or form. And then making sure that you're able to convey those things to your team and align them with that purpose, so they know how their work ultimately has an impact. I love the different points and examples that you all gave there. Thank you. So let's shift a little bit, as we're also getting so many audience questions, which I love, by the way. Keep putting your questions into the Q&A. We'll get to them shortly. And if we're not in the live discussion, we'll put them into Slack, but we love to hear from you. So thanks to everyone who's written us so far. So now that we've covered the managing up part and the visibility portion, especially that's entailed there, I'd like to shift a little bit to the team level and to individuals. What are things that you've done, examples of techniques you used to help teams prevent burnout? We've heard from things like the story points, or generally knowing velocity already to align your planning with expectations you're setting, and a couple other examples. What else have you all tried?
One thing I don't know, I lots of organization, particularly my organization, we are very agile based, right? Engineering, agile development, Scrum based, and 2-week sprints, and it's become very repetitive, right? Every 2 weeks we're doing the same events and stand up, retro, everything, right? One of the things I've noticed is sometimes we repetitive situation will cause burnout, cause people okay, why I'm doing this again and again, and then I start seeing people not really engaging in those activities. So one thing I kind of start doing is hey, can we introduce some variety of activities within the sprint so that we can mix it up, or even retro work with my Scrum Master, right, to figure out, hey, can we do the retro in different format every week, right? So that I have more opportunity for people to speak up, to learn something new. Even the event are similar, but at least we can introduce some new element into it. So some games will be a good opportunity to kind of spread it out to reduce that kind of a burnout from the boredom or repetitions.
Touching back on a comment about predictability, there's also engaging the team in their goal setting and their timeline. Predictability is hard. How long does it take to write software? Nobody knows, actually. It still has not yet been discovered how long it takes to write software, but arriving at those deadlines or at those milestones or at those goals or whatever with the team does bring agency into the team. And I think loss of agency to say, like, my life is under pressure, my work is hard, and it is being done to me by other people, and I don't get a say, is a great way to feel disengaged from your work, because there's so much you don't have control over in your day. To say this needs to be done by that time, whether or not I was consulted and I believe that that's a reasonable goal, I just have to do it now, right? And so that sense of kind of loss of agency. So empowering teams, working together on, for folks who are using sprints and sprint points or not, to say, yeah, what's reasonable here? What do we think we're going to be able to get done? And like, what's the stretch goal version of that? Sure, like stretch, be ambitious, but also be optimistic. Don't plan twice the work you know you're going to get done. Again, look back. How much did you do last week? How much did you do the week before? How much did you do the week before? Don't plan double, right? Like plan based on reality, but also just engaging the folks to have a voice in that, in their own goal setting and their own kind of ambition and their own drive. I think at least if nothing else, if we're wrong, we were wrong together, right? And it wasn't just that a sort of a date came down from the tower and we had to make it happen.
And I want to add on the helping teams know what they can actually change and where they can actually direct their energy, because a lot of teams have been dealing with a lot of changes lately, and many of those difficult ones. Like a lot of teams are dealing with survivorship guilt when they're the ones who are left over sort of in the company after layoffs, for example. I love using the circles of influence for that as an exercise with teams, to essentially walk through, hey, here's a bunch of things that have been happening. Where are the areas where we actually have control as a team? So where are things that we can decide, that we can make happen? And where are things that may be outside of our control, or where we can just sort of try and influence how things are going? Because sometimes burnout can be related, as we touched on earlier, to being frustrated about how things are and not feeling like you actually have a way to change that. And so that can also be a way to give teams agency back, give them a sense that there are things that they can do. And it's also a tool that I've used with a lot of teams who have dealt with difficulties and who are basically now carving out a space where they can be creative, where they can make things happen, and where they have that kind of impact to bring some purpose and agency back, and then also motivation as a result of that. What else on preventing burnout? Anything else you've tried, Tremaine?
Yeah, so I try to lead by example. I have experienced burnout before, so I know what it feels like, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And so let everyone see you taking all your PTO, right? Taking breaks throughout the day. Don't send those weekend and late night emails and expect people to respond. Get out there and have kind of some transparent conversations about, my bandwidth doesn't allow me to do this right now, right? Like those, and create that kind of psychologically safe space to have those conversations so that people can speak up when they are feeling stressed or burnt out or something like that.
Oh,
Yeah.
also,
sorry.
oh, sorry. Go ahead, Derek. I'll go after you.
Yeah, I think, right, I mean, having a good relationship, that the team will building that trust and bonding is such an important thing, because if your team trusts you, that they are more open and being more vulnerable in front of you, they will tell you too, right? That, hey, I really feel stressed, I really feel overwhelmed. They don't need to always act to be strong, because strong is kind of like, I can deal with everything, that's equal to high performance. No, we should encourage sharing with. Sometimes I share with them my struggle too. That's an invitation for them to share back to me. I think building that relationship and trust is very important.
I love that as a kind of to wrap back to get to where we started with this. And I'd love to switch to the audience questions now. Thanks you all so far. This was really insightful. I could keep going for a couple hours, but we don't have the time. So the first question I wanted to ask all of you is from Kimberly. How do you identify the differences between burnout and just poor performance? just going in all in very spicy?
I think that maybe kind of goes back to knowing the baseline, right? Sometimes that there are some, there are motivation problems and then there are ability problems. If you've eliminated those as an issue, then, you may be looking at something deeper that's more mental health related. So I would say, go through, make sure that they have everything that they need to do their job, make sure that they have all the abilities and skills that they need to do their job, look at their motivations, understanding where those things lie. And then if all of those things check out, then, it could be something else.
Mm-hmm. So thank you, Tremaine. The second question was, do you feel like burnout has increased after the pandemic? From Niall, who shared, I feel like a lot of people have less energy levels than pre-pandemic.
Yes.
Completely anecdotal, but yeah.
Go for it. You got
Absolutely,
it.
yes.
I was going to just say yes.
Yes, hard yes. And I think, there's still a lot of anxiety around, like, we've moved on, right? But it's still there, and there's still so much going on that I think kind of gnaws at us in the back of our head. And again, it reduces that capacity for us to be able to take on other things. So yes.
Fair. So another question, just jumping between topics a little bit to keep all of you on your toes. So one question about from an anonymous attendee about autonomy for teams. Is giving your developer team freedom to do what they want within reason, letting the team decide their own priority or goals, is that healthy?
Yeah, I think it depends on your org and your structure and your shared goals, right? But I think and every company is going to be different here, but within shared goals, like we build teams to go after certain missions, in our case, to say like, well, this team needs to focus in this area. And if they decide they're just going to make a different product and bring a different product to market, that would be weird because we're getting paid to do a very specific sort of thing, right? So obviously within same guardrails, though, I think the more autonomy and agency you can give people, the better. The more you can empower them to say, figure out what's going on in this space and what we can do about it and what we can ship in a reasonable and agile amount of time to do it and make a dent and how we'll measure and know if we did a good job. The more we can give that away to individual teams, I think the better, because we're also, just from a business point of view, building subject matter expertise, building buy-in. People understand why they're doing the work. They'll know if the thing they did actually made the world better in the way they thought it was going to be better, because they were building to solve a problem, not just building to a spec that was handed over a wall. So I am a fan.
Yes. Luke's a fan. Great.
I know it's I mean, I always feel like definitely the autonomy is important. I always seeing us as a leader is more like the engineer, like it's like kid going to soccer game. Our role is really preparing the soccer field, making sure they have good coaches, making the ball is inflated properly, but not like actually kind of, hey, you should kick this, you should go here, or right? We teach them stuff, but let them play, right? And I think that is actually the more passionate they are, in my opinion, that's the less burnout they will be.
I love that. Like you're not going to kick the ball for people. That's a great example. And on a similar vein, actually, someone asked about differences in company sizes. I think we have, like, you all are in like very different company sizes right now, from like small organizations to corporations. And they asked, did you notice less burnout at smaller companies where engineers are more connected to the results or impact, even though they may be taking on more responsibilities, perhaps because of a greater sense of ownership and autonomy? What's your sense? Maybe we have someone from like a larger company and someone from a smaller one who wants to jump in on this. I can start with a small company perspective. So I've done, I think the largest company I worked with had about 5,000 employees, and I've worked with mostly startups. I would say that the risks shift in my experience. So in smaller companies, yes, there may be more sense of purpose, but at the same time, oftentimes there's a lot of uncertainty. There's a lot of things that are less clear. There's much lower predictability. And so a lot depends on, honestly, the personality types of the people who are joining, which, side note, often then leads to somewhat homogeneous early startup teams with people who have a high tolerance for ambiguity, who are very easily able to handle change. It's not necessarily, it's not a good thing, but that also means that oftentimes there's more tendencies to overwork, that unpredictability can lead to a lot of stress. Whereas in larger organizations, that connection with purpose, in my experience, may be harder, but at the same time, there's more structures, there's more predictability. Things are typically at least easier to plan. I think, Tremaine, maybe you wanted to add something from your perspective.
Yeah, I guess I was going to say something similar, because I've worked at a smaller company and now I'm at Red Hat, which is 20,000 plus or something. And I would just say that the burnout triggers come from different places in those environments, right? You know, you can feel anonymous sometimes at a larger company, but then in a smaller one, you can feel like, you know, everything's on your shoulders, right? So, you know, it's just I don't know that it's more or less likely based on company size, but it happens in both places.
Yeah, so thank you. Another question was about psychological safety, of course, like the big trendy motivation management word of the last couple of years, and it's an important one. So the person asked, is there a correlation between a good level of psychological safety in your team and helping to avoid burnout, for example, because engineers can air their concerns and ideas more freely?
Absolutely. You know, when you have an environment where people can speak up and have their concerns addressed, that's absolutely going to be a better situation than one where people aren't sharing and are clamming up and are trying to, you know, dig themselves out of things. You know, the ability to speak up and have your concerns heard and addressed, I think, is a much better situation to be in.
To tie it to another to tie to another question being asked too, about people have different things outside of work, or different types of burnout and like different motivations. We don't always know, and nobody owes me an explanation of why they are feeling the way they're feeling, right? I can be available, I can offer, but nobody owes me that. And I think the more you can invest with your team, both, there's like the metrics angle, but just the interpersonal angle, the more you can invest and cultivate that. If you are fortunate to get that trust from somebody to say, hey, I'm actually feeling this way and here's why, your realm of being able to help, perhaps, I think goes up quite a bit. But again, like you're not guaranteed that, and it's not always certain. But the investment in psychological safety comes back in that way, to say, oh, this person's just telling me, like, I feel this way because this happened and I'm doing too much work in this. And if they hadn't told me any of that, I wouldn't have known, and I wouldn't have been able to engage. So I think that's the, being able to earn that trust with folks empowers us to kind of chip in there.
Yeah, and I want to touch on too, right, quickly, like it is a psychological safety that if the engineer coming to you to saying that, oh, I feel burnout, I feel stressed, we need, as a leader, we need to be careful, not like implying that, hey, are you not knowing how to do your job, or are you, because you're lacking of knowledge? I mean, sometimes don't relate the burnout and performance. Don't mix the discussion together, because that will be a big red flag to, I'm not going to share more, because if I share that I burn out, you will see I'm not capable of doing my job. So I want to making sure that we're sensitive about it. Particular performance, in my opinion, performance is more like a long-term thing. You don't see one incident and judge that person cannot do the work because of that incident. It's more like a continuous discussion, working with the individual, right? Versus burnout, sometimes it's like the small thing we noticed that we've discussed earlier. That's kind of the sign of burnout, and that's what we can help them.
Love that. Thank you so much, and thank you for all the great answers and also for the great questions. We didn't get to all of them, but we'll put all of the remaining ones into Slack and we'll add more thoughts. There's a lot to discuss on this topic. We heard about how burnout starts small and can look different for everyone, and how having good relationships with our employees, but also with our managers, is really a foundation. We talked about how knowing people's baselines is really helpful to see deviations from their sort of normal state. We talked about the symptoms of burnout, like disconnect, being snarky, or some people also really going all in kind of a reactive mode. We heard really good practices for like bringing it up, approaching with curiosity, and avoiding making assumptions about how people are doing. And we talked about like managing up, so like saying no, but also making sure you have the visibility you need to understand how your team is doing, if your team's energy is going towards the most important work, and also making sure that you create trust with the people you're working with on your team to make sure that they know they can approach you with these difficult topics, and you can ultimately create the environment where they can thrive. Like, I loved all of your contributions from everyone on the panel. I also loved all the questions. Again, we'll get to the remaining ones in Slack. There were a couple of really good ones left. Thank you so much for all the good insight here. We're heading to the Slack channel now. Join us in the Creating-Culture channel in the LeadDev Slack, and head there to continue the discussion. Thanks to all the panelists. I appreciate your time and all your insight. Your experience really shone through, and we hope to see you next time. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.